Hi. So in this presentation, we're going to be getting more into the brain. We've already talked a little bit about the lateralization, how the language center is usually thought to be in the left side of the brain. But as we've talked about with aphasia, the fact that aphasics, global aphasics, even people who have completely lost their left hemispheres, these are people who cannot talk normally, and yet they can swear fluently. And so that suggests that there must be something going on with the right hemisphere as well as the left hemisphere. And in fact, what we see is that there are other aspects of language besides taboo words that aphasics can still use. So for example, the social functions still seem to be there, the purely social functions, words or expressions like hello, how are you, please, thank you, goodbye. Those all seem to still be accessible to the brain even when the left hemisphere has been destroyed or the language center has been destroyed through brain damage of some sort or another. So what we want to understand is, well, what's going on there? Why is it that swearing is different than other parts of language? So part of this then is thinking about the evolutionary purpose of swearing. So why did we adapt this? Why do we have swearing to begin with? Well, as I was just saying, swear words more than most words are connected with the right hemisphere, and that seems to have to do with emotion. So as we were talking about in the previous presentation, there's a lot of talk about right-brained individuals being more emotional than left-brained individuals. Well, that comes from this idea that, or not an idea, but the fact that emotions tend to be processed in the right hemisphere and logic tends to be processed in the left hemisphere. Okay, that's right. The idea that there are some people who kind of use their right brain more than their left, or their left brain more than their right, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But, and it's just a convenient metaphor. But what we do find is, of course, that because swear words are more affiliated with emotions, they carry emotions more than any other words, then the right hemisphere must be involved. And in fact, we can even test that. We can show that taboo words, more than other words, cause an emotional reaction. This is called an autonomic response. And what we find is that with an autonomic response, when somebody has their emotions triggered, their heart starts beating more rapidly and they perspire. And we can test that by hooking electrodes up to their fingertips. And of course, electricity flows more freely when there's moisture. And so we can measure how much moisture is on a person's fingertips by putting electrodes on there. And then we have them read a list of words, or a list of words is read to them. And some of them are going to be neutral words like table or room. Those shouldn't get any real emotional response. Some of them will be more emotional like beautiful or ugly or love. These are words that trigger some emotional response in us, and we can see that there's more emotion than, say, with table. And then there are the taboo words like shit or fuck or nigger that are going to really cause a response from us, where it's measurable, that it's stronger than other words. So clearly the right hemisphere is more closely connected to taboo words than the left hemisphere is, or more so than other words. Now, I don't want to say that the left hemisphere doesn't use swear words. So clearly swear words are a part of language just as any other words are. They are grammatically encoded. They're part of our lexicon. But they seem to be cross-referenced with emotions there in the right hemisphere as well. The other thing is that swearing is closely associated with the limbic system, the emotional brain. So think about the brain as kind of having these layers. There's the cortex, which is our more rational brain. It's what makes us us. It's the intelligent part of our brain, and we have a larger cortex than any other animal. And then you go down deeper and you get to the limbic system, that's the emotional brain, what we can call the mammalian brain, because it's all pretty similar from one mammal to another, including humans. And then, of course, deep down is the lizard brain that's responsible for, blinking and heart beating and breathing and all of those, core functions of our bodies. But the emotional brain, the limbic system, is what we want to concentrate on now. And here you can see kind of a sketch of it. It's really just a group of brain structures. You see right here, and I'm going to switch to this 3D brain. And again, I think this is pretty cool. So here you can see the limbic system, and let me try to turn it so you can see it this way. And I'm going to turn it actually so it's facing forward. And we can see the different parts. So here's the hippocampus, here's the hypothalamus, I don't know how to pronounce this, the entorhinal cortex, and then the amygdala. And the amygdala actually are going to be really important to us as we go on and talking about swearing and the brain. So let me switch back and continue on with this. Now, the limbic system, it's the emotional brain is called, but Pribram, 1960, pointed out that it's also responsible for these aspects of survival of the species in particular. So feeding, obviously we need to eat to survive. But another big part of survival is fleeing. If there's danger, knowing whether to flee or to fight, right? Those are two important parts of survival of a species. And then, of course, reproduction, sex, right? So keeping the species going. And so he said, well, we can call these the 4 Fs: feeding, fleeing, fighting, and sex. Well, clearly he had a sense of humor. He didn't mean sex. Here wasn't the F. He had a different F in mind, a nice 4-letter Anglo-Saxon F word of English. Some scientists with less of a sense of humor who followed Pribram assumed that he meant fornicating, but clearly that's not the word he was looking for. He was looking for a nice monosyllabic word to meet the rhythm: feeding, fleeing, fighting, and blanking. So, one of the primary functions then of the limbic system is that fight or flight response. So swearing also apparently triggers a fight or flight response, right? And that's where you get the heart beating harder, the adrenaline coursing through our bodies. And it's the effect of it that makes it interesting to us to see what swearing is doing for us, right? So fight or flight responses prepare us for danger. And swearing seems to serve that purpose as well. So if you think about sort of the standard, response to danger, you see a snake and you get scared and you get prepared to either beat that snake to death with a stick or run away, right? Likewise, if you hear somebody swearing around you, your body starts preparing for that fight or flight. Is there an axe-wielding maniac coming at you? Is somebody angry and ready to fight you, right? So you've got to be prepared when you hear somebody swearing, just as you would be if you saw a huge bear trying to get into your tent. Also, fight or flight responses, interestingly, they help us to control pain. They kind of put a damper on pain, increasing our threshold. So this was demonstrated that swearing could do this in a really ingenious study. So what they used was this ice water. So they had the subjects, the volunteers, come in, and they would put their hands in ice water up to their wrist, past their wrist in ice water. It hurts, right? It's painful to have your hand in ice water like that. And so they're holding it in there, and of course, some people have a higher threshold of pain than others, but everybody sooner or later is going to pull their hand out. So they had every volunteer do this and see what their threshold was, right? Getting a baseline for it. Then they divided the subjects into the control group and the study group. The control group, what they said, okay, now describe a table for us. Describe this table for us, for example. And so it might be black, big, hard. So finding words, and then the studiers, the experimenters, would choose a word for them among the list that they'd come up with. Let's say black. And they would say, okay, now put your hand back in the ice water, and now I want you to shout black as loud as you want, over and over again while you keep your hand in the water. And so the subjects were going, black, 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 black. And not surprisingly, didn't make any difference. right? They couldn't hold their hands in the water significantly longer when they were shouting black than when they weren't. But now, you go to the study group, and these people were said, okay, we're told, now imagine that you just dropped something heavy on your foot. What would you say? Okay, so they said, ouch. Well, we're going to toss that one out. We don't care about ouch because it's not taboo. So then they said, okay, well, what else would you say? Shit, damn, fuck. Okay, so now the experimenters pick one of those taboo words and say, okay, say this word over and over again while you hold your hand in the ice water. So now they're holding their hand in their ice water going, fuck, 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 fuck. And now, all of the participants could hold their hands in significantly longer when they were saying fuck than with their baseline. Now, the effect actually was stronger for people who reported that they didn't swear as frequently as those who said that they swore frequently. Those people didn't have as much strong of an effect. And interestingly, women had a stronger effect. They could hold their hands in relatively longer with respect to their baseline than men could with respect to their baseline. So for some reason, swearing has more of an effect on the women than it did on the men. We'll think about that. We'll return to that question and that fact when we're talking about socio swearing a little later in the semester. Now, another thing that fight or flight responses seem to do is that they vent emotions. They actually seem to be good for us to periodically have that kind of venting. So that can also be useful to us, right? That the swearing seems to have that effect. And I'll tell you a story. A couple years ago, I had a tree removed from my yard. It was a huge tree. It was a gigantic box elder tree, much, much too old and rotting from the inside, so huge limbs of it were falling off. And so we hired some people to come and remove this gigantic rotten tree. And so the poor guy who had to climb the tree and remove the limbs, so he's up there with this huge chainsaw, cutting off big branches and having them removed, and cutting off big bits of the trunk and having them being removed in segments. And the guy looked like what you should think a tree trimmer should look like. You know, he's covered in tattoos, he's got spiky hair, and I started talking to him though, as he's taking a break. He's this really chill guy, really calm, interesting guy when he's not cutting trees. And we started talking, and at one point we started talking about swearing. And he told me, he said, everybody looks at me and just assumes that I swear all the time. But the truth is, I only swear when I'm climbing trees. And he says, when things are really tough up there, I just start swearing, and I swear like crazy when I'm cutting a tree. And I said to him, I bet it makes you feel better, doesn't it? And he goes, yeah, it does. It makes me feel a lot better when I do it. And the thing is, that's the thing, is it releases this emotion for us, and it lets us go on. So, another story, I had a student in the class who was a climber, and she talked about how when she was trying to do a really difficult move, so imagine that she's trying to reach for a hold and she can't quite get it, she slips, she falls, she's hanging from the rope, and she said that when that happens, she just starts swearing until she gets it all out, and then she tries the move again. And what she finds is that a lot of the time it helps, that swearing seems to somehow purge herself and allow her to move on and do the move. And with that in mind, I want you to think about sports, because I can't tell you how often I've heard this from athletes in my class who say that where they hear swearing the most is during sporting events, like say a race or a game or a match. And often it's before the game or the race or the match, and their coach is sitting there swearing at them. And the thing is, I don't know if the coach is aware of why it works, but the coach must be aware that it works, that it helps, because what it does is it amps you up, right? It gets us prepared. It causes that fight or flight response, which gets us moving. it gets us thinking, it gets us focused on whatever it is we're doing. It gets the adrenaline coursing through us, our heart's racing, pain is reduced, we're ready for action. So in that way, you see this a lot with swearing getting us prepped for things that we need to do. Now, I said I wanted to come back to the amygdala because this is going to be the key to a lot of the puzzle of what's going on with swearing and the limbic system. So what seems to be going on is that swearing seems to short-circuit things, that we've got these normal, natural responses. You see a snake, and of course you're going to have a fight or flight response. Somebody threatens you or punches you, or you get hit by something, we also get a fight or flight response, right? So all of that makes sense. Those are natural responses. But language is social. And so it seems that what we've got is this linguistic, lexical expression that allows us to short-circuit things and go straight to the limbic system via an arbitrary combination of sounds. Okay, now that's pretty cool, but let's think about what's going on here. So the amygdala itself, this is responsible for processing emotions, especially fight or flight responses. So part of what the amygdala does is it creates this link between the lower emotional brain to the higher rational brain, so the limbic system to the cortex. And it regulates fear-based learning. So the amygdala then says, okay, it decides how we're going to respond to things that scare us, right? So you see a snake, your immediate response is fight or flight. You're either going to grab that stick and start beating the hell out of it, or you're going to run away from the snake. But your brain says, oh wait, no, that's a garter snake. We don't need to worry. We don't need to do anything about that snake, right? Or you hear somebody swearing near you. You're like, oh my God, is that homicidal maniac coming at me? Does somebody want to attack me? And then you look and you see, oh, the person just spilled orange juice all over them. I can relax, no big deal, right? So that's our amygdala kind of regulating what is the proper response to a fight or flight impulse. Also, it seems to be able to put a damper on things. So for example, you drop a rock on your foot, you start to say, "Fuh!" and then you look over and you see that your 2-year-old niece is right there, and so you clip it and you say, "Fudge!" and you don't quite swear. Well, that's again the amygdala deciding what is the proper response in this case. So it goes both ways. We decide how we're going to respond to the swearing, or we decide if swearing is the proper response based on the stimulus, right? Now the amygdala also regulates fear-based learning. So imagine here, think about the gazelle at the watering hole, right? So the gazelle drinking water, suddenly a lion comes out of the bushes. Now what the amygdala does is it starts saying, okay, we got to take a snapshot of everything that's going on around us. All of the sights, all of the smells, all of the sounds, snap, 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 right? Just like that. Everything gets loaded into the memory, and we remember everything that's happening when that lion comes out. Why? Because it's in the gazelle's best interest, assuming it survives this encounter, manages to run away and get away from that lion, it's in the gazelle's best interest to remember absolutely everything that happened during that time, right? So that the next time that it smells that it hears that sound, that it sees that movement in the bushes, it's going to be able to respond that much faster and be that much more likely to survive it. And so our brains are the same as the gazelle's at that limbic system level. We've got the same limbic system as the gazelle, except for we've got language. And now language can short-circuit it and go directly to the limbic system, trigger the fight or flight response, and now our amygdala, likewise, we hear swearing, and like that, we're taking snapshots of everything, which helps to explain a lot of what's going on with the Taboo Stroop test, right? So remember that Taboo Stroop test I had you do earlier in the semester. So you showed a list of words to your friends, different colors. Your friend was supposed to shout out what color they saw when they saw the words. Some of the words were taboo, and of course what you found was that some of those words took longer to process. The taboo words took longer to process the color. But they also had a better memory for which words were taboo, which were the taboo words, than the non-taboo words. So what I'm going to leave this as a discussion question for you. I'm going to let you kind of weigh in on this and try to analyze what's going on with the taboo Stroop test in light of everything we've been talking about with the swearing going directly to the limbic system and triggering this fight or flight response, and then how the amygdala enters into that and acts as the link between the emotional brain and the rational brain.